Hello, this is Professor Kim Nelson with the Fashion Institute of Technology, Jewelry Design Department. This is a tutorial on painting. This is a gouache technique being executed using digital media, Painter 12. Okay, I'm going to be painting rectangular and square-shaped diamonds. Start with the princess cut here on the right. The goal here is to show two different methods of approaching it. One will be as though we were on vellum. The other will be as though we were on opaque paper. On the vellum, the first step is to lay down a wash of a medium neutral gray. And you would let that dry. On the opaque media, working with the emerald cut, you would start with a very thin wash of white on the lighter parts of the stone, which would be the lower right half of the pavilion. In a shape something like that. Comes from this corner facets up to the center. Remember, on an emerald cut stone you have a long vertical culet. And then you would also bring some of this whitewash onto the crown side, where you would also expect to have the light hitting the stone. Something like that. Coming back into our princess, now that we've put down a ground color, we'll do a similar treatment. Put a little white here, and I will come in with some dark from the opposite corner, painting the pavilion first, essentially. The next step for the princess is to draw the faceting. And as we've discussed in class before, the easiest way to draw the faceting is to draw it twice. Once in a dark color and once in a light. That gives you two chances to get it right. You need to establish the dimensions for your table. Those will be about half of the girdle. When I'm drawing freehand like this, I make some preemptive strokes to give me a sense of how right or wrong I might be. And once I have my table, I'll draw the remaining facets. Which basically have a center point at the middle of each side of the table. They should run pretty much as a continuation of the edge of the table, like here, and like here. And then the remaining facets, the corners. And the central bezels, facets. And these actually are your upper girdles, and they would be split if you wanted to go into that much detail. So that's the faceting of the crown. I'm not going to go into much work with faceting the pavilion other than to draw some radiating lines somewhat randomly, little pie shapes. Coming up into the center of the stone, I want some bigger, some smaller. Something like that would be fine. Okay. Coming over into the emerald. Similarly, I'm going to add some dark into this stone. You have to do a little more detailed drawing for the pavilion. Not a lot, but somewhat. And I'm just repeating the kind of step cut patterns, the pyramidal steps coming in and out of the center that I have up on the pavilion. You'll notice I'm not being overly careful. I don't have to be. Okay? Like any stone rendering, what I'm trying to do is give the impression of complexity. Okay? Then I will come in and put in the darker facets on the crown with a thinner wash of neutral tint. Like so. And I will indicate a few dark shapes. Mostly forming like a diagonal break. Across the facet. What's important is that the shapes form diagonals and points and arrows, the kinds of shapes you would get in the reflections of a diamond. Not making dark areas touch, or not allowing them to touch. There's dark here, so I stopped that early. There's light here, so I'll pick it up next to that, so that my shapes or patterns don't bleed into each other too much. Write that with some white. And that should be sufficient. Coming back over into the princess. Paint the dark facets on the table. Sorry, on the crown. I don't want to create large areas of dark or large areas of white. I want to have that kind of scintillating effect going on. Painting a couple of the background shapes in dark. Looking to make sure I don't create too much of the same thing. Too many shapes the same size in the same place or same area. Excuse me. That's the dark stage for both of those stones. Actually, on that emerald cut, I'm going to come in and delineate a little bit because the edges are a little too soft. Okay, I'll leave that for now and then come in with the white. See what needs to be done after I've done some white. Back over to the princess. I'm going to pick out some of these pavilion facets. And I try to always make a conscientious decision or conscious choice of to paint the pavilion separately from the crown. Even though the end result, if you do it properly, it becomes confusing where one begins and the other ends. Diamonds are like that. They sparkle and light bounces all over within them. I try and preserve, at least in my mind as I'm working, the difference between pavilion and crown. Helps to retain some of the form to the piece, because you're essentially rendering the pavilion as a downward facing pyramid, so the shadows are in this corner and the highlights are over here, and you're rendering the crown just the reverse, where the highlights are over here. I don't have to fill in all the facets. In fact, I won't. Some I'll just outline, indicate in that fashion. It's important that these dark facets catch a white highlight along their inner edge where the light catches the facet. To give a nice sense of over and under. Don't care for those lines I just made. Of the over and under that happens in a stone. Oh, I'm trying to overwork it. I should just leave it alone. When in doubt, use a dot. Okay, that would be sufficient to draw in the princess. Maybe delineate this faceting a little bit better. You can see by drawing the facets in dark and then light, I get kind of an outlined effect, which increases the detail. Using much the same approach, on the emerald. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to paint my pavilion first. Once again, shapes and patterns. Since this is not a radiating or a radiant cut stone, I use a lot of bars and diagonals to achieve the detail that I want. Outlining areas. There isn't a science to it. I mean, there is a recipe, which is what I'm showing you. But you'll paint each stone differently. And some will work more readily than others. Now, when you're painting white lines into the darker areas, it is important to take a minute and be more concise. Simply because they're going to show. The contrast is so strong that it's going to be obvious. Okay? Same thing, what I'm seeing in between these dark bands on the crown are highlit areas of the pavilion. I can't just leave them light gray and solid. I need to put detail in here. And that detail will once again be parallelograms, arrows, diagonals, whatever I decide I want to use. The goal always being to add more detail, more crispness to the stone. Having done that, I will come in now and add detail on the crown. I can't paint an entire one of these facets its full length in white, unless it's a small stone. If it's a 2 by 4 millimeter stone, then yes. In fact, you would only have one division of facets. You wouldn't have three. You have two here instead of three. But if it's a good sized stone like this one, you need to come up with things to fill in the spaces. I will break the dark lines, the dark bands, with diagonal and arrow-shaped lines, just to break them up so that they're not so heavy. I'm actually going to paint over this in white, which you can do in gouache, and of course digitally. Partially fill that one. Now I'm just kind of playing with the white to get some balance of dark and light going on here. Okay, and that's enough to draw that stone. Now the final stage for both of these requires that you use a white wash. You want the white wash quite thin, using your Pro White. And you want to have kind of a diagonal thrust to your wash. A couple of diagonal bands across the table. Two or three. Same here. You can go over the wash to make it a little more opaque so they're not all the same. Okay. And you're going to use the same wash to kind of soften the inside lit pavilion. And to lighten the lit side of the crown, reaffirming your form. Same thing here. Beyond this, anything you do now is just to soften or make it look more real. Some of these hard blacks, don't lose them all. If you wipe out the blacks, you wipe out the sparkle in your stone. But some of the harder edges I'll hit with the wash a little bit. And that would really be sufficient. Anything I'm adding now is probably a mistake, and is the goal is to try and heighten the form and add interest. And if I want to go in and reaffirm any faceting at the last minute, I can do that. But as you can probably already sense, at this point I'm just fussing around with the stone. It really is finished for all intents and purposes. So that'll do it, guys. Princess cut, emerald cut diamond. One painted as though it were on vellum, the other painted as though it was on an opaque support. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later this week.